I really do want to show people there's a very low barrier to entry when it comes to meditation. Like meditation feels like such a big, mysterious thing. And it's like, where do I start? How do I start? And I love being able to just create these simple practices so people just like you, Maddie, can find something and hit play. And then you're meditating and you're doing it and it can help you feel better. But I've always felt like there's no one size fits all approach. I don't teach like one particular style. I personally like to learn a lot of different styles of meditation, learn from a lot of different teachers, immerse myself in different practices, and then pull out elements that really resonated with me from that practice and then put them together in kind of simple, short, guided practices. So you don't feel like you have to be this like meditation scholar in order to get the benefits of the practice.
All right, everybody, welcome to the FIO podcast today. I have a wonderful guest named Kelly here today. I found Kelly when I was searching on Spotify for meditations and her fantastic podcast came up. So I'm thrilled to have you on, Kelly. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself to start off?
Absolutely. So, hi, everyone. I'm Kelly. I'm a yoga and meditation teacher, as well as a parent and an author. I like to help people kind of connect to their true selves through simple and grounded meditation practices. And I like to show people that meditation is not that hard and not that serious, and just let people kind of build a strong foundation with a simple practice that really leaves a big impact on their life.
How long have you been having your podcast for?
It is 6 years old almost, which I think is like geriatric in the podcast world, right? It's like basically a grandparent at this point.
You got some time. You put in some reps with that podcast. I loved finding your podcast. It was something where as soon as I listened to it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I have to go back to. And myself, I compete in bodybuilding and I do a lot of weightlifting, but it's in my program from my coach that I have to have these moments of meditation because my stress is off the charts. It's gotten really the best of me and my health. So I like to do a bit of a guided meditation. So I went on Spotify and I looked up like 10-minute meditations or something kind of quick. And I loved your voice and your calming presence. And it was just very relaxing. It was something that I could easily buy into. It wasn't like there was this barrier of entry of like, you have to meditate this way. Like you're just very welcoming. And I just really appreciated your approach to meditation. Has that always been like your method? How did that really start for you?
Oh, well, I appreciate all of that. Thank you so much for hyping me up, building me up in that way. Um, Honestly, my approach has always been kind of like laid back isn't the right word, but I really do want to show people there's a very low barrier to entry when it comes to meditation. Like meditation feels like such a big, mysterious thing. And it's like, where do I start? How do I start? And I love being able to just create these simple practices so people just like you, Maddie, can find something and hit play. And then you're meditating and you're doing it and it can help you feel better. But I've always felt like there's no one size fits all approach. I don't teach like one particular style. I personally like to learn a lot of different styles of meditation, learn from a lot of different teachers, immerse myself in different practices, and then pull out elements that really resonated with me from that practice and then put them together in kind of simple, short, guided practices. So you don't feel like you have to be this like meditation scholar in order to get the benefits of the practice.
I love how you phrase that as a meditation scholar, because I think sometimes it really feels like you have to have this huge experience with it to be able to get the benefits from it. And thinking in that way, I'm curious when you first started learning about meditation, or like when was the first time that you heard about that or started doing that in your life?
I was first introduced to, I didn't even realize it was like mindfulness and meditation at the time. But when I was 16, my mom was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and she's in remission now. So the story has a happy ending. But I remember she was like, they were doing clinical trials with a lot of different things while she was getting her treatment. And they were really encouraging her to, what I now know is like, practice mindfulness or visualizations, guided meditations. They're really encouraging her to do that. And we would do like some gentle yoga together, some stretches, different visualization, and kind of looking into the research as to what these intentional stress reduction practices can do to one's immune system, specifically like for your white blood cell count and things like that. And that was honestly when I was first introduced to it. And it's funny because, I don't know if it's funny, but it's interesting because I find that a lot of people come to my work um, when not everything is going right. And like that was the first time I was introduced to meditation and mindfulness as well. Like I thought of it as just like, oh, like these breathing exercises, or like, mom needs to relax. Her body's working really hard. And a lot of people come to meditation and mindfulness when something's not quite going right in life. I mean, if everything is just sunshine and rainbows and it's going fantastic and we just feel so balanced and aligned and our anxiety and our stress is in check, we don't go looking for a practice like mindfulness and meditation. It's usually when, the train starts to go off the tracks a little bit, or we're struggling or we're having a hard time, that people usually come to this kind of a practice. And that's how I was first introduced to it as well, just during that really hard stage of life.
Wow, that is an incredible story, and I'm so grateful that your mother is doing okay and she's in remission.
We are
Like
too.
you said, that
We
is a
love
beautiful
Mama
thing.
Smith around here. She's an icon. We love her. Grandma
What
Smith
an
now.
icon. Did you say she's Granny Smith?
Yeah, Grammy is her grandma name.
Grammy.
So we all, she's just an icon in our household.
What a strong female. So with learning that, during that difficult time, is that something that, did you have this kind of light bulb moment where you're like, oh, I really need to look into this? Or how did that relationship develop to where it is this big prominent thing in your life now?
It didn't at the time. It was like I was introduced to it, and something that I've had to kind of deconstruct and reconstruct within my own mind as an adult is actually my feelings around kind of mindfulness, meditation, even yoga, of it being kind of like weird and woo woo and out there. And when I started actually doing some of these things, so to answer your first question, I kind of just dabbled in it and was introduced to it. I was doing some breath techniques and things, just kind of, as anyone who's ever been a caregiver, for someone, knows that it's, deeply impacts you as well. And so I was doing some of these practices for my own well-being and mental health. But then I kind of left it there. Once things started getting better, once my mom started getting better, once I started getting older and was like, oh, I'm going to college, I kind of left it for a little bit. But it was something that I kept returning to. So when I was in college, I went to a local yoga studio, which I loved. They did some meditation, some mindfulness. And I always felt a little bit like I didn't want to tell people that I was doing it, because at the time, I know it's kind of cool now. Not that I'm calling myself cool, because I'm definitely not. I'm not a cool mom. Let me tell you, I'm not. But
I think you're cool.
well, I appreciate that. But I'm definitely just your regular old Midwestern 30 something mom. But I just, I don't know. It felt like that people would judge me if they knew that I was like into this. And when I graduated college, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, as many do. I decided to do a yoga teacher training. And there was so much, like I said, deconstruction and reconstruction that I needed to do in my own mind around these practices and how I wanted to pursue them, and like how good they made me feel. But also it kind of still felt like this taboo thing. This was like, over a decade ago, felt like this taboo thing that people were doing, or that I was doing in this yoga
Mm,
teacher training. But I just felt like, time and time again, mindfulness and meditation was something I could fall back on when I was struggling, and it just always made me feel better. And like I couldn't deny that I
mm,
felt better. And so then a couple years past that, when we moved to a one bar, one Walmart town in Missouri, I moved for love. It's how you know it's real love if you move there.
Oh yeah, that's a small town.
That is, I mean, I guess technically there were like 2 or 3 bars and only 1 Walmart. They had their priorities straight.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but that was like deep love. And I had to leave my job. I had to leave my friends. We were living in Minneapolis the first time. And, going from that to this tiny town in Missouri, I felt like maybe this was my opportunity to pursue something that I loved. And that's when I decided to kind of take the dive and turn my passion for yoga and some mindfulness into my career, because my husband was in medical school, so I never saw him or didn't see him a lot. And I didn't have any friends. I was living in the middle of the nowhere. And it was during that time that I felt like if I was going to be able to best serve my students, that I really needed to like dive deep into mindfulness and meditation, because I don't feel like I can teach something that I personally don't know.
Mm. Wow. And so when you were beginning that kind of process of learning, what was that first step like for you? What felt like you were the most called to or felt like the most appropriate at that time?
I can't remember if I personally told you this story or not, Maddie. I don't think I did. But actually, the first real step that I took outside of like maybe reading some books is, and I wouldn't necessarily for safety, like maybe recommend this right now. I found a group of monks on the internet, and they also lived in Missouri, and they invited me to come stay. Did I not tell you this?
You told me that you found a group of monks, but you didn't tell me
Okay.
that they were in Missouri and that you found them on the internet.
I found him on the internet again. This was like 10 years ago. Like the mom in me now is like, please don't meet strangers on the internet, and go like meet them. And, my mom was, everyone thought I was just gonna like, this is gonna turn into like a Craigslist killer, like true crime thing.
It
It
didn't.
didn't. But there were these group of monks, and they specifically were studying a kind of loving kindness meditation. And that was a style that just really resonated with me. And I've always been the kind of person where I feel like I learn the best when I just immerse myself in something and I kind of take away all the distractions and just be like, okay, whether it's, some kind of a training for anything, maybe it's a weekend or a full day training or something. I just immerse myself, and that's how I learn best. So I had reached out to them about learning, and we were talking over the internet because monks email, and then they invited me to come stay with them for a couple of weeks and to like live with them and to learn this style of meditation. And I was like, absolutely yes. Everyone else was like, oh, I don't know about this. But I trusted my gut. I felt good about it. And I drove down there, and I had to take this like vow of silence, although they usually collect like all electronics, but I had to tell them I needed to keep my phone. So every day I could tell my mom and my husband I was still alive, which they thought was really funny. And I was like, you know, I was like, yeah, I was like, I'm sure you're great, but like greater context here, we just kind of met on the internet, and now I'm driving to like meet you. And they live in the middle of the forest. It's like turn left at the wagon wheel, drive like 2 miles up, like literally the middle of nowhere. I was like, I am gonna have to hold on to my cell phone so that everyone can know that like this isn't a true crime thing. This is like, legit. And it was such a transformational experience for me to not only be able to immerse myself in like learning a practice, but to live amongst people that had made this their life. And there were so many little things. Like we were assigned chores that we had to do. And there's one point where I had to kind of like pick weeds in between paving stones, but you had to do it in a way where you were like radiating loving kindness like to the weeds. And that was really hard for me. And I was like, oh, it definitely got easier as I went, but the idea of just like, what do you mean? Sure, I'll just sit here and like pull weeds, but why do you want me to like radiate love from my heart to the weeds? But having such an immersive experience for an extended amount of time taught me so much about, yes, this one particular style of meditation, but like just in general, what can be unlocked when you take time to like turn inward and also challenge yourself and to just really dive deep into meditation.
Wow, what an incredible experience. I mean, hats off to you to have the bravery and the courage to just go with your heart and say, like, this is what feels like the best next step for me. I mean, Could have been really scary, but you went for it.
You know, the things you do in your mid-20s versus your mid-30s is like a little bit different.
Yeah, sure.
But
Um,
I don't know, it just felt right. And it ended up being right. And I did do my research. This is like my PSA. I did my research. I felt very good about this decision, but maybe would I have had more reservations now 10, whatever, 8 years later? Yeah, maybe. Would I encourage my kids to do what I did? Maybe not, but it was fine.
Live and learn. I mean, it sounds great. What was to you like the biggest takeaway there? Did you have any of these kind of huge experiences where you're like, wow, this is really what I want to pursue more in the future. This really clicks with me, or anything that like when you reflect on that time of your life that like comes to the surface a lot.
Yeah, there's like three big things that really come to mind. One is because I did have to take a vow of silence, which I mean is a little funny for some, I podcast for a living, so, I like to talk. But when I wasn't supposed to talk and I broke the rules sometimes, but it became so apparent to me as to how much talking I was doing to like fill silence. And I ended up leaving with such a different relationship to silence and quiet and basically not talking even when there's other people around, and like how okay that is. It felt really weird at first. It felt very uncomfortable. We would sit there and have our meals in silence because we're supposed to be focusing on like sending gratitude to like the tree that grew the produce and then the hands who picked it, and this whole thing. And discussion was just a distraction. And at first it felt really weird, but by the end, like I really settled into this comfort, and it's something that I've always held on to in terms of like, am I talking because I have something to contribute or I have something to say, or am I talking to like fill the silence or like make noise? And learning how to distinguish between those two things. So I left with a really different relationship to silence and comfort in discomfort than I did walking in. I also, funny enough, doing chores with loving kindness and mindfully every day was such an interesting experiment for me because it opened my eyes to just how many things I do in a day. And it's like you don't even pay attention to it. And you really can find like little moments of joy or, intention. You notice different things. Like even if I had to sweep the meditation hall, you just become so much more aware when you just do that one thing at a time. And you look at it as like this thing that I get to do as opposed to another chore that I have to do. You're going to do it either way. So it really kind of opened my eyes to like how different of an experience, depending on how you go into it, something like a chore can be. And then the third thing that really surprised me is I felt like I had my first really deep meditative experience when I was there. And I remember sitting, and we would sit in chairs because we were sitting for quite a while, which is one of my like meditation myths I like to debunk. You do not have to sit crisscross applesauce to meditate. Even when I was with the monks, we sat in chairs and I sat there, and I know I wasn't sleeping and I was working on my meditation, and I felt like, oh, I don't know, I felt like, oh, like I really got deep in meditation. I think I've been meditating. There's a clock in the meditation hall. It's like, I think I've been meditating for like 10 or 20 minutes without getting distracted. And I opened my eyes and it had been 2 hours.
Whoa.
And I was like, what happened? And I know I wasn't sleeping because it felt so different than like when you take a nap and you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just slept for 2 hours. And now I know, having kind of dug a little bit deeper into this, is that when you meditate, you're withdrawing your senses. And we only know about the passage of time through our senses. Like, maybe I hear
Hmm.
you say something and then I remember, oh, well, Maddie just said something a little bit ago. Now she's saying something new. Time has passed. Or it was dark outside when I woke up this morning. Now the sun's coming up. Time has passed. Like, we only know the passage of time through our senses. So when you turn so deeply inward and basically intentionally shut the senses down, you don't have the same idea of time. And I had never experienced that before. And it was like one of the wildest things ever. And rarely have I experienced it since, which is fine. And it's one of those things that kind of built kind of my own foundational philosophy of like, there is no quote good or bad meditation. Like just because one time I felt like I was meditating for 20 minutes and it was actually 2 hours, that doesn't mean that every practice after that isn't a failure if I don't do that. It's like they're all these unique, equally beneficial experiences.
I really appreciate how you continue to bring up how there's no good or bad experiences, because I think as humans, we just kind of depend on these kind of ways of like this grading system for things. And especially when we're trying something new that feels a little bit uncomfortable, we want to know, am I doing a good job here? Is this not working? You know, that kind of thing. And with meditation, it's just something like that is like that's the whole point, is like you're not doing a good or bad job. So I really appreciate that you keep saying that, because, you know, it validates everybody's experience and knowing that it's valuable regardless of how you're kind of grading that. I did want to go back to what you were saying about the silence, because that sounds amazing. What a beautiful way to actually find intention in the way you're communicating. It sounds like, you know, you would leave that experience and have this new respect for what you want to say to other people, and the intention that is there. Is there anything that you do in your day-to-day life, you know, since then, or, you know, immediately after then, to like kind of reiterate that silence in your life, or like nurturing that silence?
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of things. One, I just ever since then I've found that I try to my best to speak with intention. I don't always do it. I also have ADHD and have a tendency to like blurt things out sometimes. So it's kind of this like, you know, I don't know. It's a little hot and cold. I'm a meditation teacher who likes
I'm
to
still a person.
take vows of silence, but I also have ADHD and you know, sometimes they don't always like align properly. But you know, sometimes it's funny because I feel like my relationship with silence is different than like the general society's relationship to silence. So it'll show up sometimes in like little moments where I sometimes get a little bit self conscious because I worry, like, if I don't have anything to say, I won't, you know, I don't really have anything to say. And I think sometimes I worry that people then interpret that as me being either like rude or like cold. Like the lady was cutting my hair the other day and we had been chatting, and then I don't know, the chit chat just kind of ran dry. I didn't really have anything else to contribute, and so I just kind of sat there quietly and like, I don't know, just enjoyed the experience of getting a haircut. And but then sometimes I get a little self-conscious from, you know, it's really interesting when you start to like dabble in the practice of like intentional silence, or when you have these prolonged experiences of silence, is that the world feels a lot louder. And I don't think, I just feel like it's just never quite gone back for me. And I find that sometimes I do notice noise, and I use noise as this kind of catch-all term, as like, yes, like noise, what I hear, but I mean more like stimulation, especially like with little kids in the house and things like that. Like my world is very loud right now, and I never realized how much I missed silence and quiet and intentional. Like, I don't need to communicate right now, until I became a parent and everything was like noise and communication and like kind of chaotic. But I've always, since then, I've always found such like an ease and a comfort in quiet and silence. And I know that that's not how a lot of people feel, because sometimes when I do like meditation retreats, we periodically will incorporate silence, maybe like a silent day or a silent morning. And it's really hard for people. And I get that. Like when those first few days, when I had taken that like vow of silence, like I still was kind of talking and not taking it as seriously, but mostly because I was just uncomfortable with it. I'd never done it. And when people go on retreat and things and we do something similar, it's really, really hard for people because it just feels so different than what we're used to. And we're used to a really loud existence. And so I don't know. I don't even know if that answers your question, but it just, I have always found since then an ease and a comfort inside. It's just so much easier.
Mm. No, that definitely answers my question. And like you said, your life has a lot of noise right now, and that probably is very difficult to kind of honor that ability to be silent. But I do think it's such an important experience to understand that, like intentional silence. Like you brought up that example of getting your haircut. I've had those moments too where And I'm a neurodivergent kind of individual, so I appreciate the silence because sometimes nothing needs to be said. Sometimes we can just exist. But my partner and one of my best friends, like they have to fill the silence. They feel very uncomfortable without it, and I understand. Like, of course, that's how we grow up, is we're just talking constantly, and social media, whatever, we're constantly stimulated. So, of course, that's uncomfortable. But is there any tips? Are there any tips that you have for people who, maybe in your meditation retreat that struggle with the silence and maybe want to kind of get better at having that in their lives?
Yeah, so there's two things that I always tell people. One is you can start small. So even if we're on a retreat and we're doing a half day or a full day of silence, like that feels like a really big thing. So if anyone's listening to this and they're like, "Oh, I'm kind of interested in like intentional silence," just start with like even 10 minutes and just say, "Okay." And the thing that's so kind of beautiful about intentional silence is you actually still hear a lot. Like if you go out in like your backyard and you're like, I'm not going to listen to a podcast. I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to be on my phone. There's like so much life to be heard. So there's still a lot that you're like rarely are you ever in like silence, but there's such a difference between like intentional, like I'm not going to communicate. I'm not going to, absorb any information or anything. I'm just going to let my ears do their thing. That's such a different like silence and like true silence. But just start with like a few minutes. And I always tell people you can always go back. Like when they go on retreat, and of course they know we're going to do this when they sign up for the retreat. And, I'll tell people, I'll be like, if you want to go back to whatever you were doing before our, 4 or 5 hours of silence, like you can always do that. Like it's such a low stakes thing, but it's so fascinating, like how it feels. And some people really enjoy it. Some people hate it. And they're like, I never want to have a silent morning again. Some people feel like so about it. But I just feel like it really teaches you a lot about yourself. So just start small and know that like it's really low stakes. 10 minutes of silence. You can go back to being as loud as you want after that. But just like dabble in it and just see what happens. Be inquisitive.
I think that's a good practice because you can do that anywhere. You can have a couple of minutes of silence in your home. Um, and I think that's a really cool way to kind of listen to the thoughts that are coming to your head, like having that awareness, building that like, ground level of mindfulness of what thoughts are even coming to me right now. I've always been interested in doing a silent retreat. Is that something that you'd ever like do or host?
I would definitely be down to do it. The most I've ever done is I did a retreat and where it incorporated 24 hours of silence. So it was a 6-day retreat and only one of those days was silent. And it was a really interesting experience. And I feel like if I were to do something again, I would almost do longer days of silence because I think it takes a while to get into the rhythm. But it would more be about finding the people that wanted to do that because we have so much resistance to silence that even a full 24 hours of it is a lot. But I personally think it would be kind of a cool experience because it's just, you really do, it takes a while to kind of like hit your stride with it and to get used to like sitting at a meal table and you're eating, and instead of chatting with the person across the table from you or next to you, you're just sitting there and you're eating and it's quiet. Like that sounds like such a small thing, but it's really uncomfy at first. And so you almost need like a couple days to like sink into it. And what I will say, they say like quiet the mind and the soul shall speak. There is some of that, but it's really kind of like quiet the mind or quiet everything down and then everything starts yelling. There's definitely an element of like we use noise and we use sound and we use stimulation. And I do this too. We all do it as kind of this like distraction or dulling effect. And so if there's anything that's kind of sitting beneath the surface, like when you slow down and you get quiet and you don't have the distraction of communication or anything stimulation really, like all you really have is just you and your thoughts and your feelings, and that can take a while to sit with. It can be really eye opening and it just gives you such a deeper insight into yourself, which I think is amazing, but also kind of scary. and really hard too. And I think it's sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to unpack that.
I totally resonate with that. We moved to Illinois. I'm from this area, but we moved back a couple of months ago. And when my partner first started his job, we had always kind of worked from home. We've been together through COVID, and like I said, we both were working online and whatever. But this was the first time that he was like going away for work, like spending most of the day not in the house. And you know, I'm somebody that's, pretty comfortable on my own. I'm pretty independent. And I was starting to get depressed, and I was listening to these audiobooks back to back. It was something that like I started doing as like an ADHD tool where, for a chore that I didn't like, I'd put on the audiobook so that I could get it done. It was motivating. I'd be like, oh, like I was listening to true crime or whatever. So it was really enticing to be like, oh, wow, I get to listen to it. And then I started to listen to it when I would go for my walks, because I go for walks a couple of times a day. And then it just, the entire time he was gone, I was listening to these books and I was getting more depressed. And I was like, I'm not even like in my head right now. I'm filling all these times of silence with this book. There are no like thoughts coming in here, like unless I'm working, but I'm still not being conscious. Um, and so that was a big moment for me where I was like, okay, you need to like turn the books off, just sit in your home, like have a meal. You're gonna be fine. I think that silence can be very uncomfortable because you do have to confront a lot, which can be really intimidating for some people.
Yeah, and someone had really interesting insight when I did this. It was a little over, I guess it was almost a year and a half ago, when I did this retreat, and I let everyone know that like if silent day was too much, like they could always like, tap out early. I just asked that, they respect the silence that other people were holding. And it was so interesting. This one woman brought a perspective to me that I'd never thought about because we just live very different lives. And she lives on her own, and she is single, and she is like, I spend a lot of my time in silence, and silence feels lonely to me, which is such just a different experience than I had, because for me it almost feels like a comfort, but my experience of life is like that it's very loud. And and that just really broaden my perspective as to like what silence can feel like for people, or if you live alone, or your life already has a lot of silence in it, how then we have a tendency to then fill that silence with stuff, because we do as like human beings equate like quiet and silence with loneliness. But what I always have, not always, but the conclusion I've come to is that the more you get to know yourself, like you realize that you can't really ever be lonely because you're never really alone, because you have like yourself, you have your true self. Like the more you get to know yourself, it's really hard to feel like truly like lonely. And but I'd never thought of it that way. And I love when my students come and we have these experiences and they give me a perspective that's totally different than mine, because especially when you're turning inward, when you're being introspective, you're doing something like an intentional practice, like a silent day, everyone's going to have such a different experience, and you only know what your experience is. And so I always appreciate their different perspectives, but I never thought about that, about how for many people silence feels lonely, and
Yeah,
how
and
that's
just
that's
the
their
act of
life. Yeah.
talking is like, filling that loneliness, even if it is, you know,
Like
a
audiobooks,
substance kind of,
podcasts,
yeah,
someone
whatever.
else talking.
Right. Wow. The other thing that you said about the takeaway from that time with the monks, um, really spoke to me was the part about the chores and finding like kind of the beauty in that. I had seen something on social media the other day that was like, it was a mom posting about, having a lot of kids and a lot of chores to do, but she had said something about like, instead of looking at all these things of like all the dirty dishes and all these dirty clothes and laundry I have to do, like how grateful am I that I can clean these plates which fed these children, and I have these resources and I can do the laundry that clothed my kids, and we have these things. And I always really appreciate when we can kind of look at things in that light. It sounds like the chores you're doing, like that's kind of a small part of it. The social media, not the chores. So is that something that you carry in your day to day, or something that you teach your students now, of that like gratitude in the like tasks?
So I do teach it. Do I always practice it? No. Do I, sometimes still have human moments? Like I want to paint a very clear picture of like I'm not at home like folding all of my family's laundry being
I'm
like,
so
"Oh, what
thankful
a
for
delight.
this.
Oh my gosh, I'm so great. Look at this beautiful color of this little baby onesie with a poop stain on it, whatever."
Yeah.
It's like you still have these human moments of, there's sometimes where I'm like, "Ah." And I'll sometimes do the thing, you have your clean clothes. I'll do this intentionally for myself, even though it makes me mad later. They're all clean, and then you dump them on your bed because you're like, that I can't go to bed until I fold these stinking things. I don't know if you
Mm.
ever do that, but then it's like
Oh yeah.
bedtime and you're like, why did I do that? Now I have to fold
Gotta
all this laundry
now I
before I
gotta
can go
do
to
it.
bed. Yes. But, you know, I think that what I try to do, especially with like the chores thing, and the thing that was like so beautiful about living with the monks is it really what I mean, I was kind of living in a vacuum. It was like I I wasn't even allowed to like journal or read. Like they really didn't want like any kind
Oh
of like
wow.
communication or anything like that. And it was like I really didn't have anything better to do than to, pull those weeds or to sweep, to kind of break up my meditation practice. But what I try to do is, and this is definitely an exercise that like I share with my students. Also, it's something that I share with my students that are parents that like you can do these things with your kids. Kids are so much better at this than we are, where they're like, I'll have my son, he loves to pull the books off his bookcase. I'll be like, okay, we need to pick them up. And he'll just get like so excited because we'll be picking up his books and then he'll find one. And it's like he found this treasure and maybe he hasn't read it for like 3 days. And he's like, oh my gosh, this one, can we read it? And he just gets like so excited instead of just picking him up and like slapping him on the bookcase to just like check, get it done. Kids are usually way better at this than we are. But I use it as kind of this like reset where when I find myself like when every chore, even the word chore, right? You're like, oh, it's a chore. When they all start to feel really kind of cumbersome and like annoying in a way, that's my own kind of litmus test where then I can sort of hit the reset button and be like, okay, it is not, you know, I can change my perspective here. And so there will be, then I can pick something, be like, I'm going to do this one chore and I'm just going to be present. I'm not going to listen to anything else. I'm not going to think about how, oh, here I am scrubbing these dishes when someone could have just rinsed it the first time and now I have to whatever scrape off the old food. We all have our things. It's like I'm just going to have the experience of this chore and just be present with it. And that always really helps me to kind of hit that reset button when I find myself kind of getting in that spiral of like, oh, then I have to do this and then I have to do that and here I am picking up after everyone again. And there can be space for both where you can be like, I'm tired of picking up after everyone. And also then you can sometimes challenge like that mindset for some things as well. So I like to use it in my personal life as kind of the reset button when I need it. And I do think it's a really nice practice that you can try. Like if everyone today just does like one chore, something that you have to do today no matter what, dishes, laundry, picking up kids' toys, um, what would it be like if you just let yourself be present for those few minutes while you did that thing? And again, let it be easy, let it be, be inquisitive, be curious about it. And I don't know, it's usually a really interesting experience. It's just so simple. You're gonna have to do it anyways. So just see what it's
Right.
like if you do it a little bit differently.
I think that's a great tip. And I love that you really emphasize like this is not all the time. It's
I
not this
mean,
perfect picture.
if everyone thinks I'm at home being this like perfectly zen mother floating around with like no frustration or resentment in my heart, then I have not painted a very clear picture of myself. But I think, that's the piece. One thing that I really love about meditation is that it truly is a meditation practice. And the reason that we call it that is you're practicing these things during your meditation. If you're, mindfully doing some kind of a chore or a task, like if I can work on something like loving kindness or if I can work on self-love or reducing my anxiety when I'm meditating, I'm acquiring tools for my toolbox during that practice that I then have to apply in everyday life. And so I
Mm,
think it's important to remember that we're all just human beings doing the best that we can. And I like to think that, these practices utilize or give you more tools you can utilize, but that also I'm a meditation teacher. This is my life. And I still, you know, you'll hear me saying things like, well, I would have gotten that done today if I wasn't picking up for 30 minutes after everyone that could have just, because no one can seem to get socks in the hamper. Do I still say things like that to my family sometimes? Yeah. And like, you know what? I'm human. But
mm,
it's then like the bigger things. And you'll see this stuff like where maybe the socks on the floor where it feels like that's a straw that broke the camel's back. Like it might still be annoying to me, but like, am I going to like snap about it? No, it just doesn't feel like that big. Like when I kind of explore my frustration or my own stress in my meditation practice, it feels like alleviating some of that pressure. So then when life does throw you things where you're just like, great, like for the 9,000th time today. Also, this one in particular is extra annoying because I'm extremely pregnant when we're recording this. So I have to get like the geriatric, like get down to the floor to pick up those
oh,
dang
yeah, that makes a
socks and then
difference.
like, whatever. But it's just like even the things that maybe felt like a big deal at other times, like through meditation, just kind of softens the edges a little bit. But we're also
I
human
love
beings.
that.
We're just doing the best we can.
Yeah, I think that's really great to hear. That's really raw and really helpful because, like we kind of mentioned a little bit ago, of like these myths about meditation, we have to, sit crisscross applesauce and you have to like have your mantras and your mms and all of those kind of things. There's this picture that's painted of meditation, and I think that kind of pushes people away because they don't feel like they can get to that point. Um, so with that kind of in mind, how can people create their own kind of meditation practice that makes sense for them? Where if they, don't have, an altar or like a place to sit or, some perfect environment, how can we create that for people that are just kind of getting into
Yeah. So I'm going to answer your question with a question.
it?
And not that this is my podcast and I'm asking the questions, but I'm curious, Maddie, if you have a similar experience like with bodybuilding where people look at like the finished product of what you do and then they're like, "Oh, I could never do that." Like it's like they stopped themselves before they start. Not that everyone is like meant to
Mm.
be a bodybuilder, but I hear that a lot with like meditation where people are like, "Oh, you're a meditation teacher." Like, cool. I could never like, "Oh, I could never do that. My mind's like so busy." Do you find that with like bodybuilding and like the work that you do too, people look at the finished product and they're like, "Oh, I could never," so they don't even try?
Absolutely. People say that all the time. Like, oh, I can never do that, but I want to do a little bit of this. And it's the same answer of like, well, nothing that I've done is magic.
Mhm.
You just put one foot in front of the other. There's all these little baby steps that you take to get there with anything that you do. Nope, you didn't just wake up overnight and it's perfected. So there's a lot of trial and error, which I'm assuming, with meditation, you kind of figure out what works for you as well. So with bodybuilding, people do think that a lot, or with fat loss or, dieting in general. A lot of people feel like, oh, I could never do that. And it's never as hard as you think it's going to be, especially, the beginning is just tough because you make all these adjustments and that feels uncomfortable, but we can feel uncomfortable. Like we can get through discomfort.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Like so much of what you just said resonates with me. And I think like it's very similar with meditation. And one thing that I would add to like what you just said is that I think sometimes people look at, and I say like the finished product, but I mean like people can make some changes at the beginning. Like there's so many steps along the way from point A to point B, from being like, I want to change my lifestyle to I I want to compete and like I want to do like competitions like Maddie does, right? You don't necessarily have to always go there. Or like, I want to reduce my anxiety, but I don't need to be a meditation teacher like Kelly, and all of that is fine. And so I think that when it comes to setting up just like a really simple meditation practice, and I love what you said about being uncomfortable, because so much of meditation is like learning just how to sit with discomfort and also learning how to sit and experience without judgment. So being an objective observer of what's happening within you and around you, which can be really uncomfortable. But for a lot of people, the big things is one, you kind of have to start by calling yourself out on your own barriers because again, meditation is not that hard. I'll tell you how easy it is in just a second. But ask yourself like, if I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling stressed or I've thought about practicing meditation, why haven't I? And again, we're going to do this without judgment. Maybe it's I don't know how. Maybe it's I don't know what style. Maybe it's, well, I did always think I had to do 30 minutes and that feels unattainable to me. So kind of looking objectively as like, why haven't I started? And then when you're actually starting to practice, studies tell us that 8 to 10 minutes a day is enough to get the physical, mental, emotional benefits. So I promise we can find at least 8 minutes a day. If you're really, really busy, I recommend doing 8 less minutes of something that's not serving you. For me, again, one of my kind of more toxic traits, I am sometimes, subject myself to doom scrolling on social media before bed. And then before you know it, you're like, what the heck? Like it's been like 45 minutes. I should be sleeping by now. Just, we all have our thing. Do 8 less minutes of something that really isn't serving you. Just do a little swap. And you've got your time right there. So if you like to scroll online before bed, maybe we do 22 minutes instead of 30 minutes. And there's your time. No matter how busy you are, we've got the time somewhere, even if it means swapping something. So we only need 8 to 10 minutes a day. And meditation is just single pointed concentration. So I describe it as if your mind is a light bulb, we're turning that light bulb to a laser pointer, and we're going to point that laser at one thing for our 8 minutes. That could be taking deep breaths, that could be a mantra, that could be taking slow, intentional steps in a walking meditation. It can be listening to the words of a guide who's walking you through a meditation practice. Just like if you go to like a yoga class, you have the teacher that's walking you through the sequence. A guided meditation is just like that. You can just listen to the words of the guide and follow along. That's your meditation. You can be in any position that you want. You can, as long as you can breathe without anything getting in the way, you're pretty much good. And you can do any type of meditation you want. And that's really it. Any time of day, you can meditate. I say just pick the time that you're most likely to stick with. If you're not a morning person, don't decide that you're going to totally overhaul your mornings and start getting up 10 minutes earlier. If the time your alarm clock goes off is hard enough already, don't make it harder on yourself. You're less likely to stick with it. And that's really all you have to do to start a meditation practice. Pretty much anything that you have told yourself is a reason why you can't meditate. Say, oh, I have ADHD. I have ADHD too. We can pretty much work with anything. It's just taking your mind from a light bulb to a laser pointer, pointing that laser at one thing for 10 minutes. That's it. And then
What
you're
a great way to
meditating.
put that, especially with ADHD. Like, this is the most beneficial thing that we could do for ADHD. Um, when it comes to meditating and you're kind of just getting started, and we kind of covered the fact that you don't have to be crisscross applesauce, but do you recommend that people are seated, or can people go for a walk and listen to your podcast, for example?
So I usually recommend at first, there's some exceptions. We get into a little bit of a tricky area for like walking and listening to the podcast as well. You absolutely can do it. And I do find that that's sometimes a really great option, especially for people who are neurodivergent in a way and like just sitting still isn't super accessible. That can be a
Mhm.
great option, but kind of like silence can be hard for people, but important. Stillness can be too. So I usually challenge people to try just for these few minutes, just try to be still as best you can. And I find usually my criteria for like a meditation position is you can breathe without anything getting in your way. You can relax your body so you're not constantly like, oh, my back hurts, my hip is cramping, but not so relaxed you're going to fall asleep. As long as it meets
Mm.
that criteria, that could be sitting in a chair, that could be maybe sitting in bed or even lying down in bed if you don't think you're going to fall asleep. That could be laying on like the floor on a yoga mat with knees bent. As long as you can breathe, you're not like twisted up in any way, and you can relax, but not so much you'll fall asleep, it works. So I do encourage people, if they can, to try to explore stillness during their meditation practice because it can be hard and challenging. But if that's not attainable, you absolutely can go out for a walk. Just take slow, intentional steps. We just want to avoid kind of that urge to do the whole like two birds, one stone thing where you're like, well, I'm going to list like habit stacking, where you're like, I'm going to get my steps in and I'm going to listen to this meditation podcast. And so then I'll say I did both at the same time and then check they're both done. We want to try to avoid that kind of a mindset because, again, it's only a few minutes. And a big piece of meditation sometimes is the exploration of both silence and stillness. And that can be hard to do if we're also trying to like hit our step count at the same time.
Yeah, multitasking is, while it's beneficial to our to-do lists, it's never really beneficial to our brain.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important distinction, because I feel like a lot of people do listen to podcasts when they're walking, or if they're wanting to do a guided meditation, it can be really easy to, like you said, habit stack. So kind of having that little bit of a criteria of just like sit down in the chair, be comfortable, sit where you can move and breathe. I think that's a great place to start for people. Are there any other kind of criteria or tips that you suggest for people getting started with meditation?
I do think, and this is not a shameless plug, I do think that often a guided meditation, which is appropriate for any skill level, if you will. I still love a good guided meditation. I love someone like creating a practice for me. But I think if you're really just starting, finding, whether it's on a podcast or if it's on YouTube, or there's a lot of really great apps out there where there's wonderful teachers creating these short, simple guided practices where you can just hit play and listen. I think that's such a great place to start because it takes away a lot of the like what ifs and like, how do I do this? Or the quote, am I doing this right? Because you have someone that's kind of walking you through step by step. I think that's such a great place to start. And so looking up some guided meditations, again, short ones, like I loved your story, Maddie, of, and I hear this from a lot of people. They're like, oh, I just put into the search bar, guided meditation when you can't sleep. And one of yours popped up. So I listened to it and then I fell asleep and it was great. And so then I, went back to it. But like, I love that. And just think about, what do I need? Like, you know what? I just want like 10 minutes. So just, there's a bunch of like just simple 10-minute guided meditation. You could put 10-minute meditation for anxiety and you'll get a lot of different options. And it's important to find a teacher. Like with guided meditations, people tend to be really sensitive to like the voice or the sound or the background music. So try a few different ones until you feel like you've found a teacher or a guide where their particular like style or sound resonates with you. But I really do think that's one of the easiest ways to just get started. And we have the world at our fingertips with our phones. You could, right now, wherever you're listening to our voices in the search bar, whatever topic of a meditation you feel like you could use, self-love, anxiety, insomnia, positive morning, whatever it is, just type it in the search bar and see what comes up. And you could be meditating like in 10 seconds.
Yeah, I think that's great. And especially, like we've talked about previously, is that guided meditation isn't cheating. It's a great place to start. And I personally, I listen to your podcast almost after every training session, because that's when it's been programmed into my day of like, I need to be meditating. I need to be like having some breathing, nasal breathing, or, just slowing down. So I listen to your podcast almost every training session. And I am very particular about sound and noise and what you can hear. And you have such a calming presence and voice that it is super helpful. And your guided meditations are so quick. Like there's none of them that are very long, and they're super easy to go along with. And I have I have aphantasia, so I'm not somebody that can like visualize a lot of things. So I find your guided meditations really easy to digest, and you just have such a calming voice that it's super helpful. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that again, because people that are listening, I think listening to your podcast is great. And when I listened to you, I was like, we've got to get her on the podcast as soon as we can, because this is awesome.
Oh my gosh, that's like the nicest thing ever. Just totally filled up my cup. I'm so curious though, what is the reasoning behind, this is curiosity, not at all me challenging this. Why specifically is it your coach that tells you
Mm-hmm.
to meditate after your training session?
Mm-hmm. So with that, right now my cortisol is really, really high. These are kind of like two different trains of thoughts, but my cortisol is really high. It's like in the 50s when it should be like 18 to be high. So I'm pretty sick a little bit, but after
happens to
training,
the best of us.
yeah, it's not good. But after training, you're very excited, especially after, a big session. And you want to get your heart rate down, especially when you're eating like a carb meal, just, simply for digestion's sake. So, in order for me to get myself kind of calm, I have to do some meditation, and have some of that mindfulness to get my heart rate down after, a crazy session where my heart rate might be in like, 130s or whatever, and trying to get it down to like 70 something. Um, so being able to like have that meditation and even reflect on the session, it does a lot for like the mind and the body, especially going into eating, because when you're too excited, your meals don't digest as well, especially a heavy meal
Mm.
that's like a carb meal. So that's kind of the thought process there.
Oh, that's so interesting. I appreciate you sharing that because I love hearing there's so many like athletes in particular that use meditation but for different reasons, and so I love
Mm.
hearing and I think it's so cool hearing about the ways that like meditation is incorporated is specifically kind of in like the professional athlete, like in like the athlete space. One I hear a lot too is that it's really good. Meditation is really good for circulation, but also recovery because it helps with like the return of oxygen basically to like the tissues of the body. And then a lot of times people will use meditation for like visualization when they're working on like new skills or certain like performance outcomes, which is really
Yeah.
interesting. But I've never heard the particularly like the application and calming yourself down before a meal too.
Hmm.
There's so many cool
Yeah.
things out there. I love
I
that.
know meditation does so much. So thank you for everything you're doing with that.
Oh,
Um,
that's so cool. Thank you for
and
sharing that.
to wrap it up a little bit, you have so many awesome projects going on, and I'm going to be recording a podcast about my recent trip because I needed to take a solo trip. I did some soul searching, I did some amazing things, and I used your journal prompts. But I don't want to give anything away. So if you
Okay.
would like
Okay.
to share about these projects you have, I'd love for you to share about
Okay, well, now I'm definitely going to listen to that episode because I'm so curious about because I knew you were taking this trip. So I do have a couple of different projects going on. The one that's always going on is my podcast. It's called Mindful in Minutes. So every week there's a new guided meditation on there. Since I am now a mom and we're saying 1.5, because as you know, I'm currently very pregnant. As I said, that's why I'm so grumpy about the socks on the floor, is that it's like,
it.
that's like my training for the day, getting down on the floor and getting back up, even like once.
I
I need to
believe it. You're having that
reduce
kid
my heart rate
soon.
then.
Yeah.
But I have a secondary podcast called Meditation Mama, which is for fertility, prenatal, and postnatal meditations. And then I have 2 books. So I have one that is out. It's called Meditation for the Modern Family. So it is kind of the same, really easy to digest, approachable guide to like how you can incorporate mindfulness into a family system, all the way from when you're pregnant to you have adult kids. And there's practices in there for kids like infancy through adulthood. And then I have another book coming out, which is the one that Maddie had kind of, teed me up for perfectly because I did send her a little PDF copy. That one's called You Are Not Your Thoughts, and it is a book specifically. It's part book, part interactive journal, and it's specifically around meditation and anxiety. So every day for 8 weeks, there's a different guided meditation. There is a journal prompt and then a mantra you can use for that day. So the first half is a lot of like meditation 101, how meditation can help with anxiety, how to set yourself up for success. And then there's 8 weeks kind of worth of interactive things. And Maddie told me that she was a journaler and that she was going on this trip. And I said, let me send you a little PDF. So she's seen it, but that comes out on January 2nd, but you can pre-order it now on Amazon. So those are the
Oh,
big
amazing.
projects. And then having
You,
the
you,
baby, that's the personal big project.
when are you due again? I don't think we mentioned in the podcast.
As we're recording this, I'm doing 12 days. So I just say any
Crazy.
day now because it's like a big question mark. It could be today, it could be in like a month. I don't know.
Oh my
If anyone's
goodness.
pregnant, you're on your baby's time. They'll come when they're ready. And
Oh,
it's
you are
just like
incredible,
just
Kelly. You're
waiting.
just so impressive. And we will put the links to the pre-order and the Modern Family book in the podcast notes. But beautifully done. Kelly is super thorough. It's super easy to approach meditation with Kelly. So if you are interested in the podcast, the books, anything. We'll have that all below. But Kelly, thank you so much for your time. We're really grateful to be able to speak with you. And I just love getting to know you. So thank you for being on here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Maddie. What a delightful time I've had chatting with you and getting to know you. I can't wait to hear how your trip went later.
Thank you. We'd love to have you on again. I'm sure we'll be keeping in touch. So this was really great. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Maddie.
All right. Good luck with everything, and we will connect soon. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Sounds good. Thank you.